Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the next installment of my Phantasm franchise review. And today we'll be talking about the first sequel in a long-ass fucking time in terms of Phantasm waits. Not the longest, but still. 1988's Phantasm 2. And of course, joining me today is Trevor Thomson. Make yourself known.
Howdy, everybody.
And of course, he's Texan, so he has to say howdy. He's contractually obligated by law as a Texan to say howdy.
Yes, how did you know?
I know everything.
I wouldn't go that far.
Anyway, so yes, indeed, Phantasm 2. The one installment of the Phantasm franchise, at least in my corner, everywhere I look, it seems like people love and adore Phantasm 2. I've seen a couple reviews saying that they like Phantasm 2, but they don't like it quite as much as the first, or they don't think it's the best in the franchise like many other people do. But the number one biggest defender of Phantasm 2 that I've seen is, of course, Cody Leach. Not too long ago, he made it official in his Ranking the Phantasm franchise video that he considers Phantasm 2 to be his favorite of the entire series. Now, as somebody who has seen this film twice, once when he first saw it and the second time with a fresh open mindset, what do I initially think of Phantasm 2? Well, I'm afraid it's going to be one of those days again, because I'm actually going to come out here and say that I don't think Phantasm 2 is nearly as great as a lot of other people think it is. What about you, Trev?
Well, it sounds like I'm going to have to seek out Cody Leach's channel.
I definitely do recommend that.
Because I'm very intrigued by what he has to say now.
Spoilers, he hated Phantasm Ravager.
Because I guess I'm off. Okay. Well, we'll get there. But it sounds like we would probably agree on this, because I hate to agree with popular opinion, if we can call it that. But yeah, I really dig this movie. I think it's probably my favorite as well.
Well, when I say that I don't think it's as good as everyone else says it is, that's not me coming out and saying that I think it's a bad movie. It's not. In many, many, many ways, certainly objectively, I will say that I think Phantasm 2 not quite is the best of the series, but it is probably the most well-made. And it's not a bad movie at all. It's a well-made movie. It's much more it's much more solid. It's much more well-made. It's much more streamlined, and it just has a Don Coscarelli. I feel like he almost reached his full potential with what he can make Phantasm into something that could be as good as it is. He reaches his full potential, in my opinion, in Phantasm 3, but this is another close second. But still, there are some things about this film that do rub me the wrong way, and I will explain when I talk about the production. Do you have anything production-wise to add to this film before I get into the big stuff?
No, actually, I think I probably agree with you on what was going on behind the scenes, but still, in spite of that, I think it came out pretty good. It probably is a little overrated, perhaps, but I still really like it.
So, now Don Coscarelli had absolutely no intentions of making a sequel to the first Phantasm. He felt that the ending to the first Phantasm was a definitive ending in his mind. But I guess as the years went on, he got some ideas together, and he was commissioned by Universal. Now, of course, in the 1980s, slasher movies and horror movies were a big thing, especially in the late 80s. This movie came out in 1988, 9 years after the first Phantasm film. So Universal commissioned Don Coscarelli to make a second Phantasm film. They gave him a $3 million budget, which is the highest budget of the entire Phantasm franchise, which is nuts. Considering how good this movie looks, it's amazing that it only cost $3 million. But with that being said, this is one of the biggest problems that I have with this movie right off the bat. With that $3 million budget, and with that desire to want to cash in on horror, Universal also decided that they wanted to be a bunch of dickheads and enforce some extremely harsh studio interference with this film. Like they had so many guidelines and stats and statistics that they wanted to meet with this film. They wanted Don Coscarelli to make this into a much more mainstream and streamlined horror film, which to some may not sound like a bad thing because it fixes a lot of the problems with the first Phantasm film, which it does. But at that same time, with that, it takes away what makes Phantasm feel like Phantasm, and it makes this movie feel a little bit more generic. Now, the number one biggest thing that the studio wanted to interfere with was his casting. Now, Don Coscarelli, of course, I don't think they had an issue with Angus Scrimm returning as the Tall Man. Like they were just like, okay, no, Angus Scrimm is Tall Man, so you can have him. But they did not want Don Coscarelli to hire A. Michael Baldwin or Reggie Bannister to come back and play Mike and Reg. Which that's what they call him in this movie is Reg. They never call him Reggie once, I don't think. But Don Coscarelli was saying, no, like these people they're in the first movie and I want to bring them back. Universal's reasoning for why they didn't want the two to come back was because apparently they hadn't acted in any films ever since the first Phantasm film. But I just kind of feel like that's a lame excuse because, you can teach people how to act once again. It's not like they forget how to do it. So Don Coscarelli and Universal Studios came on a compromise. You can keep one, but you got to recast the other. So Don Coscarelli decided to keep Reggie Bannister as Reg and leave behind A. Michael Baldwin, and Universal forced him to cast a pretty boy, James LeGros, as Mike. Spoilers on my opinion, it doesn't work. But that being said, so all the studio interference and studio meddling was executed on the film, and lo and behold, boom. In 1988, Phantasm 2 was released, and it didn't do as well as Universal was hoping. It only made $7.3 million against a $3 million budget, which granted made more than twice its money back, but I guess Universal was really hoping for this movie to be a gigantic hit, and it just wasn't. I think it was probably just because there was a 9-year gap between 1 and 2. So that probably had something to do with it. But after this, well, I'll get to that when I get to Phantasm 3, but Universal wanted nothing else to do with the Phantasm franchise after this. And I think that's for the better. So what's your oh, wait, no, you already went into that. Like, I was going to ask, what's your personal history of Phantasm 2? But you kind of went over that with the first part. But is there anything you want to add about Phantasm 2 before we get into the plot?
Going on with what you were saying about when it finally came out, 1988 was kind of like this really big year for horror movies. It was almost like the big hurrah of the 80s because, I mean, there was still some sequels in 1989, but a lot of those are
garbage.
Considered some of the worst in those franchises. But 88 had was knocking out a lot of heavy hitters, and they also had some original things like Child's Play and Pumpkinhead. So, I guess it makes sense that, the general filmmaking community was thinking, well, how about we bring back Phantasm and see what we can do with that? And clearly, this was its one shot at going for the mainstream, and
it didn't work.
Well, we saw what happened with that.
which is kind of a shame because I would have liked to see Phantasm become much more of a mainstream franchise, but unfortunately, I guess it just wasn't there. Anything else you want to add?
Oh, as far as my personal history, I pretty much all watched these right around the same time in fairly quick succession back whenever Ravager came out. And I just remember, I have a very fond memory of watching this one because, I liked the first movie. And I was like, okay, this is an okay start. And then one evening after work, I popped this in, and I just was pretty engaged by it. And even though I think I've seen this about 4 or 5 times in total, there's been a few rewatches in between that first time that I didn't feel quite the same way I did the first time. But after watching it a couple times for this review, I'd say I'm kind of back in that same mindset.
Well, like I said, I've only seen this film twice, and like I said, when I bought the Phantasm collection, I watched one Phantasm movie every night for 5 days. And I was kind of excited to get around to Phantasm 2 because of all the good things that I heard about the film. So I was like, okay, so maybe this could be like my favorite of the franchise as well. And at first, like the first 2 acts of this movie, I was digging it. I was like, okay, like this could be something I could get into. And then the 3rd act rolled around, and I was like, I don't know. And then I watched a few more reviews. I tried to kind of search around, and I, lo and behold, remembered, oh yeah, Decker Shadow reviewed the Phantasm films. So I was like, okay, so maybe I'll watch Decker Shadow's series on the Phantasm reviews on the Phantasm series. And as soon as I heard the words studio interference, I was like, oh no, it's one of those movies.
Yep.
So I researched the film a little bit more, and on my most recent rewatching, which was the night previous, I could see a lot of the stuff that I was fearing that I would see, and yeah, it stuck out to me. And yeah, I don't think this movie is as good as everyone else says that it is, because there are some things that really do get under my skin and drive me nuts. So with that all being said,
actually, since you
say what?
Actually, now that you brought that up, I can kind of agree that the first 2 acts are really strong, but then things kind of falter.
Hang on. You're glitching out a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How about me?
Okay, you're fine now. So what were you saying about the first 2 acts were good?
Yeah, the first I was agreeing with what your initial assessment was. The first 2 acts are really strong, but it does kind of falter in the last act.
Yeah, a little bit. But we'll talk about that when we get to the pros and cons. All right. Were you getting your ass kicked? Salo?
What?
Are you getting your ass kicked?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh no.
Because it kind of looks like you're rage quitting.
Me?
Yeah. Anyway, so, well, let me grab a soda real quick. Gotta have that. Ugh. Gotta have it, of course. Alrighty, so the plot of Phantasm 2. The film introduces a woman named Liz Reynolds, a young woman who has psychic abilities, and he has a psychic bond to Mike Pearson and the Tall Man, who manifests in the form of prophetic nightmares. Liz pleads for Mike to find her, and as she fears that when her grandfather dies, the Tall Man will take him. The scene then transitions where the first film left off, the Tall Man and his minions attempting to kidnap Mike. However, Reggie manages to save him by blowing up the entire house the fuck up. already establishing that the budget for this movie is much higher because you actually get to see the faces of the lurkers and you get to see a lot more of them too. Also, the movie literally opens with a house exploding. In 1986, after being institutionalized for 7 years, Mike has faked his recovery to get released. And that night, he returns to Morningside Cemetery where he proceeds to dig up graves. You do realize those things are buried under at least 6 feet of dirt, right? And he says that he's dug up 3 in one night. So either he must be the Incredible Hulk or he just must have a lot of stamina. But anyway, Reggie interrupts him and explains that what happened in 1978 and the Tall Man were not real. And in response, wait, that'd still be 8 years. Why would it? Never mind. Mike reveals, in response, Mike reveals all the coffins that he had exhumed at that point are empty and urges Reggie to help him hunt down the Tall Man. And en route to Reggie's house, Mike has a premonition and frantically tries to warn Reggie seconds before an explosion kills Reggie's entire family. Convinced by Mike's precognition, Reggie agrees to accompany Mike. They break into a hardware store and stock up on supplies and weapons, which is one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie, if I'm being honest, because it just feels like such a load up and get the fuck out so he can kick some ass scene. And to quote Decker Shadow, when Reggie opens up the cash register and like tosses in a couple, I do think it was probably like $200. I just want to say, yeah, they stole way more than $200 worth of shit. Anyway. And traveling on northwestern country roads, they encounter abandoned towns, pillaged graveyards, and a few of the Tall Man's traps, one being an apparition of a young woman's naked corpse, and another being a gruesome encounter with a creature resembling Liz, which tells them to travel east toward the town of Paragord, Oregon, in a really high-pitched, nasally Angus Scrimm voice.
You play a good game, boy. Come east if you dare.
Meanwhile, Liz's grandfather does die, and her sister Jerry disappears during the funeral. And while searching for her, Liz finds the Tall Man and flees. The presiding priest, oh God, this guy, Father Myers, maddened with fear and alcoholism, desecrates the grandfather's body with a knife in a desperate attempt to thwart its reanimation. However, the corpse rises anyway and kidnaps Liz's grandmother. And in the morning, Liz finds a funeral pin in her grandmother's empty bed, and the Tall Man psychically tells Liz to return at night if she wants to rescue her grandmother. Fuck, nose itches. Prior to her arrival in Paragord, Mike awakens to find that Reggie has picked up a hitchhiker named Alchemy who eerily resembles the nude apparition. They find Paragord deserted and dilapidated, and when Liz arrives at the mortuary, she is confronted by Father Myers, who tries to convince her to escape with him. But he is killed by a sentinel sphere in a really disappointing fashion. I'll explain why. She encounters the Tall Man and discovers that her grandmother is now one of his lurkers. She flees and runs into Mike in the cemetery, and later that night, in a really fucking cheesy, hammy, corny, and forced dialogue scene, she just, after knowing him for at least maybe an hour, she's like, I love you. Ugh. Fuck me. Later that night, the Tall Man captures Liz and drives away in his hearse. Mike and Reggie chase after him, and after the Tall Man runs them off the road, their car explodes. At the crematorium, Liz is taken to the furnace room by the Tall Man's mortician assistants, but she escapes and sends one into the furnace. Mike and Reggie break into the mortuary and find the embalming room. And while Reggie pours hydrochloric acid into the embalming fluid, Mike discovers a dimensional portal that requires a sphere to open. They then split up to find Liz, and while Reggie searches the basement, he fights off a graver and several lurkers with a chainsaw and his quadruple-barreled sawed-off shotgun, which he only fires once in this movie. Wow, dick teases. After a vicious fight, Reggie castrates the graver to death and guns down the lurkers. Mike saves Liz from a silver sphere, and when it becomes embedded in the wall, they use it to access the portal. But before they can destroy the building, the tall man surprises them, but they fight him off and pump him full of the acid-contaminated embalming fluid, which causes him to melt in a really nasty and gross way. They set the building on fire, escape, and are greeted by Alchemy, who has procured an abandoned hearse. As they ride off, Alchemy, of course, in a Phantasm twist, reveals herself to not be human, and the hearse swerves wildly and then stops. Reggie, bloodied and battered, falls to the ground. Mike and Liz, trapped in the hearse, try to convince themselves that this is all just a dream. However, the slot to the driver's cab opens and reveals the tall man, who tells them, "No, it's not." Hands break the rear window and pull Mike and Liz through it, mirroring the ending of the first film in sequelitis fashion, thus ending the film. So what do you think of this plot, Trev?
Lots to like here. I actually find, again, going back to those first two acts, there's just, I don't know a better term, but there's kind of a cozy, this is just like a horror movie that you would like to put on just for the idea of Reggie and Mike going after the tall man.
I can agree with that.
This sense of fun. Yeah, it has the sense of fun, like you were mentioning about whenever they're stocking up, and I'm just like, yeah, we're gonna go get him. Let's go. And it just, it's fun. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. It's very engaging from those first two acts.
Well, I can agree with a lot of that. There is a lot to like about this movie. It definitely feels like it's a fun movie. It incorporates the 80s fun into Phantasm, which is not a bad thing by any means. There is a really cool sense of camaraderie and urgency and badassery into the tone of this film. In that aspect, the film works wonderfully, in my opinion. It just, though, like I said, there are just some things about this movie that kind of hold it back for me, but I will still strongly say that the first two acts of this movie are pretty stellar. It's just the third act. The third act is entertaining, but it has one major problem with it that I will get into when we get to the cons. So, that being said, Trev, lay your pros on me, because I know you got a lot of them.
Yes, I have 8 this time around for a change.
Alrighty.
All right, so number 1 is the score. It's done by the same two guys, Fred Miro and Malcolm Seagrave.
Mm-hmm.
And really, whenever I think about it, this is the version of the theme that tends to pop in my head first whenever I think of Phantasm. And then after that, the sort of quieter version from the original movie. But this one with some kind of echoey reverb, it has like an echoey effect to it that, for lack of a better term, this is overused, I suppose, it kind of has an epic feel to it.
Yes, it does. That certainly does help, because this is a much more epic, big in scale feeling film.
But yeah, that's, I think that about says it all, is that this is, for me, the most memorable version of said theme.
I could agree with that. It definitely feels the most mainstream version.
Yeah, and really that's kind of a commentary on what this movie was trying to do in general, is that it was trying to be more mainstream. I think that reflects in the tone that those first two acts have, and it's really striving for that.
I'm going to say this too, but this isn't really a pro or a con, but this is something I also do want to say about Phantasm 2. This kind of reminds me of Halloween 2 in a couple of ways. One, of course, is that Halloween 2 was put out by Universal. Duh. I don't know if Halloween 2 had any studio interference along with it. I wouldn't be surprised, but both Halloween 2 and Phantasm 2 have elements of studios wanting to make these franchises more mainstream and more public friendly as to what they wanted to see at the time. Both movies include more kills. Both movies include a little more action. And both movies include a score that is the same thing. It sounds much more 80s, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you... I need to stop saying that.
No.
What was I going to say? Like, Halloween 2 was much more synth-heavy with its music, and this one just sounds a lot more epic because it's a much bigger in scope film. I don't know if that's just me, but I do feel like there are some similarities between Phantasm 2 and Halloween 2. Not in its plot, but just how the movies are structured, and especially in the time period that they came out in. And especially with the studio that distributed both of these films. I don't know if you agree or not.
No, actually, I do agree that it has that that vibe to it, that 80s vibe, the score. I mean, but no, actually, the comparison I would make with another movie or first two movies, and this is like a Phantasm version of that, so it's not entirely the same. I was thinking a lot of the differences between Alien and Aliens.
Yeah, that is something that Cody Leach brings up too. He also brings up the difference between Terminator and Terminator 2. That one's way more drastic of a comparison. I think Alien and Aliens is a much more apt description because both first films of this franchise are much more horror and sci-fi centric, and the second installments of each franchise, there's a much bigger focus on guns, which is another 80s thing that a lot of horror franchises were doing at the time, is that the big focus is guns, and there's a lot more guns in this movie. But yeah, I definitely think that the description between Alien and Aliens and Phantasm 2 is very fitting.
But on the Halloween note, I think Halloween is a much easier concept to make mainstream.
True. It also helps that only 1 year before Halloween 2 came out, the original Friday the 13th came out and set the bar for 80 slasher films. So that's a much more easier idea to make more mainstream, whereas something extremely abstract and mindfuckery like Phantasm is a little more difficult to make mainstream. But it's not impossible, as Phantasm 3 proves. Continue.
Using that burp fuel. Okay, so all right, I'm gonna say all these next three all at once because they kind of flow into each other. So pros 2, 3, and 4. Pro 2 is the budget. Pro 3 is the effects, and Pro 4 is the photography.
Yes.
And so the reason those flow together is because the budget affords the effects to be a lot more impressive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any pipe cleaner tall man fingers running around.
Thank God.
Yeah. And, you mentioned, you got into it a little bit earlier about how we actually get to see the faces of the lurkers this time around. They're actually pretty well articulated. And there's more sentinels. There's a big gold one. which
Yep.
does some pretty awesome shit, to be honest.
Supposedly they called it Rambo on set. Huh?
How would it?
Why?
Go on.
Whatever. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying I wouldn't blame him for calling it Rambo. I actually, again, since I just brought up the aliens comparison, it's like the Queen sphere.
Yeah, I can see that. Continue.
But so the effects, they really use their budget well, and they look really good. There's the back apparition, I guess we can call it,
which kind of looks like Freddy Krueger a little bit.
Yeah, it also kind of reminds me of the Poltergeist worm, from Poltergeist 2.
Never saw Poltergeist 2. I've only seen the first Poltergeist movie.
I would recommend the second one, the third one.
I've heard 3 starts out good, but then it becomes bad.
Yeah, I need to rewatch both of those, but I really like the second Poltergeist. And it actually, Reverend Kane actually reminds me of the Tall Man a fair bit.
All right, so I have to check those out.
Yeah, I definitely recommend. So, anyways, there's also concerning the effects, there's a really neat shot whenever we're back looking over into the Tall Man's his realm, his other dimension, and there's this real gooey lurker that's falling out of its canister that I thought looked really cool.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And let's see here. Those are definitely some effects highlights for sure. I mean, there's other little tidbits here and there, but they're just really cool to look at. They have that, the 80s was, as far as its horror movie effects, they were definitely some of the best in the genre.
Look at John Carpenter's The Thing.
Exactly. I mean, there's lots of other examples, but that's for sure.
David Cronenberg's The Fly. I don't like that movie very much, but it has stellar effects.
Exactly. So, really, in that sense, I think Phantasm 2 contributes to that tradition very well.
Agreed. Definitely on a much smaller scope, because this is still a $3 million budget we're talking about. And even if you have a talented director like Don Coscarelli that knows how to stretch a budget, still, there's only so much that they could show. But what they do show looks really good. So I guess it's kind of an embodiment of the phrase less is more.
To be honest,
huh?
Yeah, exactly. No, I was about to pretty much say what you just did. And really, there's kind of a bit of a minimalist thing going on with the Phantasm creatures and whatnot. They're not super complex.
Nope, which isn't bad.
Again, less is more, and sometimes the simplest thing is probably the best thing to go with.
Continue.
And so, again, for these 3, the last one of those 3 that kind of run together, the photography is really nice in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's some shots, showing the Cuda as it's going down the highway that just really captures the scenery, the sunsets or the rolling hills of the countryside.
Yeah, it's pleasant to look at.
Yeah, and lots of eye candy. And there's also some really good creepy shots of the cemeteries and whatnot. I like the crane shot whenever Mike and Reg are going through and examining all the exhumed graves.
Oh, yeah, I love that scene. It's really, really eerie. You're just like, fuck, this is just totally fucked.
It's a whole new ball game, man. A whole new goddamn ball game.
Well, maybe they can just build a fire, sing a couple of songs, huh? Why don't they try that?
There we go with our continuing awesome sequel references.
Maybe we should review the Alien series together.
I was actually going to suggest that. I was wondering if you're open to it.
We'll talk about that later. But continue. So pro number 5 for you.
Yes. So pro number 5 is the Tall Man.
Yeah.
Even though I agree with the points that you make, but really, if you think about it, he's not really utilized a whole lot in all 5 of these movies.
Well, like I said in my first Phantasm review, is that the 3 biggest problems that plague the entire Phantasm franchise, one of them is that there's never enough tall man action.
And it begs the question, is it a question of the fact that, Angus Scrimm isn't really a young man? Is it that he probably couldn't be very physical, or,
It maybe that was the reason, or maybe Don just really wanted to have him embody, the less is more type thing, or it was a combination of both. But I'm going to save that for later. But continue. The tall man is still great in this film.
Well, in our first review, you made a very good point that I was eventually going to bring up, is that there's some similar ground covered with the Hellraiser movies, especially with Pinhead and the Tall Man and their similarities. Really, in the case that the Tall Man isn't super physical, in this movie, not so much, because he actually has a bunch of one-liners in this one. But in later movies, which we'll get to, he has some very compelling dialogue.
Especially in part 3.
Yes, indeed. And so I think that's what helps the Tall Man and Pinhead kind of stand out from all the others, is that when you're listening...
So, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm pretty sure Hellraiser 2 came out in 1988 as well.
Yeah, so all the really popular franchises were up to 4, I think, at this point. Well, with Friday it was 7, but it was pretty much Jason's 4th appearance with the hockey mask.
True.
And so the 2 ones that we're comparing, Phantasm and Hellraiser, they both had their second movies this year. But with Hellraiser, it was more immediate because the first one just hit the year before.
Yeah, and for some reason the studio had so much faith in it that they literally greenlit it before it was released. And also, for the record, anybody who watches this and is going to ask me, am I going to review the Hellraiser series? The answer is fuck no. I am not subjecting myself to the 8 shitty sequels post Hellraiser 2. Fuck you.
Well, since we're not going to do that, I will just point out that I actually like the first 4 a whole lot. And I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. Continue.
Yeah, so, maybe the less is more thing doesn't really apply here because we want to see more of the Tall Man. But I still think that he always makes an impression in all of these movies, in my opinion.
Yeah. Agreed.
I mean, he is the main antagonist, so of course he should.
Agreed.
Yeah, so I think that's... I'll let you... Well, we'll see if he's a pro or a con for you, but I guess I'll go on to number 6.
Yep, go ahead.
I actually really like Reggie in this movie.
Yeah, Reg is a big improvement over the last movie. That's all I'll say for now.
I would actually go so far as to say this might be his best performance in all the movies. I'll rewatch the other 3 to kind of gauge that further, but he really stepped it up for this one. So I guess him being retained was a good thing.
Agreed, yes.
Because it allowed him to improve as an actor.
True. Very much so.
And apparently, I forgot, there was 2 other quote-unquote franchises that he appeared in. I know Wishmaster is one. I can't...
Angus Scrimm was in Wishmaster as well. He was the opening narrator for the first Wishmaster film.
I think that's what I'm thinking about, is that both those guys were carried over or also appeared there.
Also, I don't really have any desire to watch the Wishmaster movies. Maybe the first one, but I'll pass on all them sequels.
Yeah, they sound like they kind of jumped into the problem that Hellraiser had after number 4, at least in my opinion.
Boy.
And also, real quick, I'll mention, I actually kind of understand why you don't like 3 and 4 as far as Hellraiser is concerned, because they kind of start dripping into a Nightmare on Elm Street syndrome.
Yes.
But anyway, back to Reggie. He's a big reason why those first 2 acts are so fun, because really I think this is what made Don Coscarelli consider or eventually decide that he's kind of the face of the franchise, which is odd, because he's just this. He's really not in the first movie a whole lot.
No, he's not.
There's just something. Maybe it taps into that kind of cult classic or cult film appeal. There's just something really oddly compelling about this balding, middle-aged ice cream man hunting down basically a metaphor for the Grim Reaper.
Okay, Mike. Because that's kind of something that Mike says in Phantasm 2.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I'm a 19-year-old kid. You're a balding, middle-aged ex-ice cream man. Gee, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, I thought that part was hilarious. Aside from the fact that they also blew up a cat.
Movie. Are you trying to make me hate these characters?
Well, I mean, once you think about it, oh God, that's terrible. But when you first realize that's what they did, it kind of struck me as funny.
Anyway, continue.
Okay, so I guess pro number 7. You're probably not going to like this, but I actually liked Father Myers' performance. Well, maybe not the performance, because some of it really is over the top. But I liked the idea behind what he was experiencing, because I was trying to imagine myself as this person of the cloth, the clergyman, realizing what this situation is and kind of considering or pondering what it means for his faith.
Are you religious at all?
I can't say I am, but also the atheist label, there's some real assholes who are atheists, so, I guess I am an atheist, I just don't like the term.
I'm agnostic, for the record. I believe in a higher power, but I don't believe it's an old man in a white beard and a white robe.
Yeah, I think the religions, the Abrahamic, if I'm saying that right, I don't think they're just too structured, I think.
True. But that's totally off topic. Continue with Father Myers.
Yeah, that's definitely a rabbit hole there. But I really liked, even if it's not. Again, he makes some really funny, over-the-top looks in this movie. Like whenever he, stabs the corpse of Liz's dad, and realize, and that zoom in. There's actually some shots in this that I don't know if Don was doing this intentionally, but it's kind of an homage to Sam Raimi.
Well, there is like one of those mortician dudes in a crematorium. He was dumping a box full of ashes into a bag that was labeled Sam Raimi.
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to mention that.
I want to tell you this too. I think another franchise that would mix so well with Phantasm is Evil Dead. Because there is something that I do want to talk about when we get around to reviewing Phantasm Ravager. It involves a unused script.
Oh, okay.
But we'll get back to that. We'll get to that when we review Phantasm Ravager.
Yeah, we'll get back. Yes, but I would love to see, and it would probably only be a comic book thing at this point, I would love to see a team up between Ash and Reggie.
Oh, yeah. Boomstick and Chainsaw versus Doomstick and Chainsaw.
Yeah, or even make it even better and throw all these the really cult franchises together. I would love to see Burt Gummer thrown in there. I would love to see those quote-unquote three musketeers.
That would be epic. We should all text Michael Gross online to see, hey, make a Phantasm movie as Burt Gummer.
Yeah, I gave that a shot with my Jurassic Park crossover. Nothing came of it.
Damn.
And also, I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but there might be some potentially bad news regarding Tremors. But we might cover that when we start going through those movies.
Uh-oh. It's not a
maybe
go woke or go broke thing, is it?
No, it's just a matter of, I guess the term would be shelf life.
Oh, we'll talk about that later, but continue.
Yeah, I'll talk about that later. But anyway, yeah, so I like the implications of what was going on with Father Myers, even if the performance is probably one of the weaker things in the movie. I just like the idea that Dom was going for there. And it also leads to one of the tall man's, probably his most famous quote from this particular movie.
They have no need for your services. You think that when you die, you go to heaven? You come to us.
You're killing it with that impression.
Which, again, is very reminiscent of Hellraiser. Like, over the course of the series, the Hellraiser franchise, and especially Pinhead, pretty much became an antithesis to religion, which is completely against Clive Barker's original intent for the Cenobites, but it still does work sometimes. I don't know if you agree or not, but that's what I think.
Because, I believe Clive's actual name for Pinhead isn't Pinhead at all. That's just something that kind of caught on. It's supposed to be the Hell Priest. That's what he's supposed to be called.
That is correct, yes.
And since we're kind of making some Hellraiser references, if they ever tried to do another one of those, I would like them to try and adapt that book that he did, or that fairly recent book he did, The Scarlet Gospels. I think that would be an interesting premise for a Hellraiser movie.
Well, continue, yeah.
Anyway, okay, so we're moving on to my last pro, and I kind of got the impression you won't agree with this either, but I actually like James LaGrosse as Mike. He is a pretty boy. He is picked because Universal, the executives, were thinking that he's probably going to, be that mainstream draw, or he has that kind of element to him that I guess they deemed mainstream.
Yes.
But actually, come to think of it, probably the reason why I like him in this movie again is the way he does have a good chemistry and a good rapport with Reggie Bannister, and that's part of the reason why the first two acts of the movie are so fun, is because it's that team up that finally, hey, let's go get this bastard. I think they sell that really.
It's a good camaraderie.
Yeah, and it's possible that probably could have happened if Michael Baldwin came back. But,
it's absolutely possible, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into it with 3 and 4. I kind of think they move away from that in the coming entries, and probably why James LaGrosse makes this impression on me is because this is really the only time the partner, the dynamic duo aspect of Reggie and Mike is really explored well.
Possibly, yeah. I'll get into it when I get into my cons.
But yeah, that's all I have to say there. That's my 8 pros.
Alrighty, so I have hang on one second. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 pros. Okay. Pro number 1 is that the acting in this movie all around is a big improvement over the first film. I'm not going to specifically talk about any character. I have really mixed opinions for James LeGros, but I'll say that his acting is pretty decent. He definitely feels like a 19-year-old version of 79 A. Michael Baldwin. Like he's really spitfire and hot shit and all that. He wants to get shit done and get it done as quick as possible. Reggie, huh?
Well, shoot the fucker.
Yeah.
You're in the chat scene.
Angus Scrimm plays the tall man, of course, very well. I'm not going to talk about the tall man himself, but I'll just say, of course, the Angus Scrimm's acting is still very good. He still plays the tall man very well. It's his posture, it's his demeanor, it's his facial expressions. He gets a little bit more dialogue in this movie, which is nice. And overall, he still plays the tall man very well. Reggie is easily the biggest improvement. I say that his acting is the worst in the first Phantasm movie, and it is. All of his dialogue is so bad and cringy and forced and painful to listen to. Here, his acting is a drastic improvement. Like it's night and day. I almost could not believe this was the same guy from the first Phantasm film. All of his lines and his dialogue is not cringy in the slightest. It's still a little hammy, but that's just because this is a Phantasm movie. You can't have a Phantasm film and have Oscar-worthy acting. It just doesn't fit. It's like mixing water and oil. It's just not going to work. But overall, Reggie's acting is a drastic improvement over the first film. And just like the acting overall in this movie, it's much better. Pro number 2, this is a great expansion on the Phantasm formula from the first movie. This does kind of tie into one of my cons with the film in that it has major sequelitis. Well, that's all I'm going to say for now. But everything that we saw in the first Phantasm movie, we see a lot more of, and we see a bigger expansion of it in this movie because of the bigger budget, longer runtime, and more focus dedicated to it. We see a lot more stuff from the first Phantasm movie seen in a much better viewpoint, which I do like. Same goes for the Alien movies. You see bits and pieces of what the alien's homeworld and what the alien life cycle is like, but here we see a lot more of that. Or in Aliens, we see a lot more of that. Same way it goes here. Like we see a lot more of the process of what goes into making all the dwarves and what the spheres do and how the bodies are exhumed. We see the gravers, which are introduced in this film, which are just like brainwashed humans or like zombies, I guess, who wear masks and dig up all the graves. We also see the morticians that cremate the dead bodies and prepare people for embalmment. It's all really fascinating stuff, and it's all in the first 2 acts, specifically the second act, but it's all really good. And we see what the lurkers look like once they come out of those barrels. They're all slimy and sludgy and nasty looking. It's great. Pro number 3 is the much better production values. Again, this movie cost only $3 million, which, fun fact, this was the cheapest movie that Universal made in 1988. But again, I feel like Don Coscarelli is one of the most underappreciated directors that knows how to stretch a budget. Sometimes I kind of want to say that Don Coscarelli is James Cameron light. Not going to quite go that far, but it is in a similar vein. He's one of those directors that knows how to stretch a budget. And in this case, it's very, very, very obvious. For a $3 million movie, this movie looks like it could have been made for at least $6 or $7 million. So that's really cool. All the sets look a lot better. They look a lot more clean and a lot more streamlined. They look like a lot of effort was put into them. There's not nearly as much location shooting as there was in the first Phantasm movie. I think there was a little bit here and there. The cemetery set where you see this entire giant graveyard that's just been pillaged looks great. It looks creepy. It looks desolate. It looks run down. All the towns look like ghost towns. They all look really good. There's a couple sets here and there that look a little cheap, like the church where when Liz's grandfather is being put to rest, there's only 3 people there for the concession, plus the 2 undertakers. So I was like, okay, this is like the smallest funeral that I've ever seen in my life. How is there so few people here for this man? You'd think there'd be at least like 7 or 8 people there for his funeral, but whatever. But overall, the production values for this movie are much higher, and they're a big welcome improvement over the first film. Pro number 4 is the music. Not much to say. Trevor and I pretty much already said it. The music is a lot better. It's a lot more 80s. It's a lot more epic. It's a lot more fast-paced. Doesn't sound like horror movie music. It just sounds like dark action movie music, which is fitting because that's what this movie is. And at least it still retains the classic Phantasm theme, and it sounds great. It's a lot more 80s and a lot more epic and a lot more fitting for what this movie is going for. Overall, it's great. It gets your blood pumping and your heart going when it needs to be, and it kind of gets under your skin and creeps you out a couple times when it needs to. Let's see. 1, 2. Pro number 5 is the tall man himself. I will never, ever say that the tall man is bad in any movie that he's in. Possible exception with Phantasm Ravager, but I'll get to that when we get to Phantasm Ravager. But here, tall man's still great. He still has a very menacing posture. He has a very menacing demeanor. He's got some great dialogue. Like his first line in the movie, "Graveside service is about to begin," and how he like kind of when he gets stuck with that pin and he just like licks his blood off the thing. He's like his facial expression shows that he's fully aware of what he's doing to people and he loves it. It's all in those subtle ways that he just stares at people and he accentuates his face. You know exactly what he's thinking. And again, it's a very character-driven character, Angus Scrimm as the tall man. It's great. Whenever he's on screen, I can't take my eyes off him because he's so great.
It gets under your skin.
Very much so, too, yeah. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Pro number 6 is the action scenes in this movie are pretty fun. The car chase is really entertaining, even though it's really short. Shoot the fucker! It's still really fun. And the final action scene at the very end, I just realized there's only... Oh, no, the opening action scene, too, with Reg versus all the lurkers is really fun. I've never seen a dude literally beat the ever-living shit out of somebody with a shotgun like a baseball bat. And he also uses a baseball bat to take out a lurker. Just crack right in the back of the head. And, of course, the final battle with Reg versus the Graver and Mike and Liz versus the golden ball. It's all really fun stuff. There's also a little touch of humor in there, too. Like, Reg revs up his own chainsaw, and the blade itself is only about, like, that long. This Graver pulls out a giant lumberjack's chainsaw where the blade is easily, like, this long. And he revs it up and starts going at him with the chainsaw, and Reg is like, oh, fuck. And the way that he kills the Graver is kind of funny, too. He literally cuts him in the balls with this chainsaw. And I also love how he takes out the lurkers the one fucking time that he fires that goddamn quadruple-barreled shotgun. That gun is so underused in this franchise. It's so awesome. A quadruple-barreled shotgun. And he fires it once.
That's sad.
But the way that he takes out the lurkers is awesome. There you have 4 lurkers. Yeah, like my nephew just said. He has 4 lurkers coming up the stairs. He's like, God damn it. Boom! Mows all 4 of the motherfuckers down. and you just see yellow blood spraying all over the place, and they fall back decimated in slow motion. It's great. Thankfully, they use that thing a lot more throughout the rest of the series, but still, that gun is so underutilized. It's so sad.
That gun and that car are probably some of the coolest in the genre.
Agreed. So yeah, the action scenes are very entertaining. Not much else to say. And the last thing I want to say is the special effects in this movie, Pro number 7, they're pretty solid. The lurkers' faces look really good. They just look like old, withered, desiccated, zombified dwarves, and they look really freaky. They look really nasty. They just look like rotting zombies. The blood effects are pretty decent. Well, what little blood that we do see in this movie looks good. When the gold ball is tearing apart that one mortician, how it drills into his back and the exit wound that it has looks really good. And when it's sticking out of his mouth and it's just drilling intermittently, that looks really gruesome and nasty. When the balls are flying around, it's clearly a ball on a green screen, but I still say it looks fairly decent for what it is. The best effect, I think, in the entire movie is the tall man's death. How he's literally liquefied on the inside, and there's parts of him that just melt and wither away into literally puddles of goop. Well, I'm pretty sure what they did is that, like, there's one scene where the tall man's hand is like on the floor and it's melting. I think what they did was they got a wax figure of the Angus Scrimm's hand, and they just aimed like hot studio lights at it and just let it melt and sped up the footage. It looks really, really, really solid, and it literally looks like the man is melting from the inside out. The explosions also look really good. Fun fact, they only used, for both houses that they blew up in this movie, they only shot that explosion once. But they filmed it from different angles so that they could reuse it and make it look different throughout the film. So both explosions look really good. And when the Hemi-Cuda blows up, that looks really good too. So overall, the special effects are really, really solid. And again, $3 million budget. This movie looks really good for what it is. All righty, let's get into the bad. Go right ahead, Trev.
Well, believe it or not, this is probably going to shock you, but I only have one con.
What?
You're probably going to go ahead.
What? What?
Yeah, only one con. There was only one thing that really bugged me about this.
What?
So you ready?
Go ahead.
It is the Liz subplot. I actually think the character is fine, but I feel like what they were trying to do here was that I got some Shining vibes going on with what they were implying about her and Mike.
Maybe a little bit.
And I feel like it was probably Don's idea, of course, but I feel like Universal was behind that because they thought that would probably be something that would reach an audience.
Yeah, I might as well talk about that too. Like, Liz is con number 1 for me as well. She sticks out like a sore thumb. In my opinion, she really sticks out like a sore thumb because not only does her character come out of butt the fuck nowhere, but they never explain, does she have psychic abilities or what? Or is it just a Phantasm movie where you could literally throw bullshit on a dartboard and it'll still be called a Phantasm film and it'll make sense?
I was watching with subtitles the first rewatch this time around, and during that really corny scene where she's talking to Mike, they're talking in their heads. She called it Cheney.
I noticed that too. I thought she always said that they're dreaming.
Yeah, that's what I thought without subtitles, but I happened to watch it with subtitles this go around, or that first go around, and chaining, which was interesting. I mean, I can understand the term, but it just, again, really, you said it, Liz really just comes out of nowhere, and I can't help but think that that was something
that the studios wanted. They wanted a female love interest to once again make this movie feel much more mainstream.
Or some
Huh?
a love interest, or just, that whole, she's basically that whole psychic cliche, which, I mean, I guess Mike is too, but.
Well, at least they kind of have, you can just kind of imply that because of his connection to Tall Man. Like, Tall Man is focused on him because he's one of the very few that has seen the Tall Man and lived. But with Liz, her psychic abilities and her connection to Mike and the Tall Man is never explained, and it never makes sense. What?
But they're also apparently the people like them are the only ones who happen to notice that the Tall Man is up to something kind of screwy.
Yeah.
And arguably, Tim, in the next movie, he's, I guess, continuing that line of thought.
He's much better at it, though.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Again, I mentioned this with the first movie. I think that with the Phantasm series, Don Coscarelli was really just throwing pretty much everything at the wall, and I don't think he even cared what stuck. He was just, this was his opportunity to do a horror franchise, so he was throwing every kind of related idea he could at the audience.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Though I want to quote Decker Shadow somewhat. I don't mean to be quoting so many other people, but this line of his really stuck out to me, and because it was funny, but also B, I would love to see that kind of shit work. Decker Shadow said in his Phantasm Ravager review that Phantasm Ravager really doesn't quite feel like Phantasm. But then again, you could throw cyborg dinosaurs and cybernetic women in the future with machine guns for tits, and it would still work for Phantasm. Come on now. Cyborg dinosaurs and cyborg women with machine guns in their tits. A, that's funny. But also, B, who wouldn't want to see that as a Phantasm film?
Oh, no, I'd go for it, definitely.
But yeah, Liz, for me, just doesn't work. I honestly think she's the weakest character of the entire franchise. I may be eating my words when I get around to Phantasm Ravager, but thus far, I think Liz is the weakest character in the entire film. And I maybe think Don Coscarelli thought that too, because she doesn't show up in the rest of the series.
And she's killed off rather quick at the start of the next one.
Yep.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. So, anything else to add before I get into my giant list of cons?
Yeah, go right ahead, because that was my only one, believe it or not.
Alrighty. So, I have, not counting Liz, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So technically 10 cons. But I just talked about one. So I have 9 left to go. Yeah. Now I am going to get this small one out of the way because I'm not sure if I should list it as a con or not. Now, I don't know if this is because I have the Phantasm collection, but I have the Scream Factory release of Phantasm 2. Now, I don't know if this is a fault of the print that they used for Phantasm 2, or if this is a problem in any copy of Phantasm 2. But the audio for a lot of Phantasm 2 is poorly captured. There's a lot of lines that are really quiet, and there's a lot of sound effects that sound really muted, and there's a lot of dialogue that is overpowered by background sound effects. Like there's a lot of lines specifically from Reggie where it sounds like he's whispering when Mike is talking to him like in a normal tone. Mike just whispers back to him. But I get the sense that that's not what he's doing. It just sounds like it's bad audio. And the number one biggest example of the bad audio is when Reg revs up his chainsaw to go up against that graver. You hear him say, "Come on, you mother," but you can barely hear him over the rev of the chainsaw. Now, again, I don't know if that's the fault of my copy of Phantasm 2 or if that's just the copy of the print itself, because they were using bad audio. So I don't know if what's the case is, but a lot of the audio in this movie is really inconsistent. And I feel like you kind of have to watch this movie with subtitles in order to understand what everyone is saying some of the time. So I don't know if you experienced that problem as well, or maybe that's just me, but yeah.
I'm not sure if it's the release, because from what I've heard, they pretty much use this master for subsequent releases, because now the Scream Factory Blu-ray and DVD are out of print.
Oh, great.
I have the DVD. But yeah, I'm not sure if it's something that's always been there, or if it's just the job that they did with this not remastering, this
release
version of it. But I actually kind of like some of the quieter, like narrations and whatnot. But I can see your point.
All right. Con number 3. This movie has quite a bit of sequelitis, meaning that a lot of stuff in this movie that are supposed to be twists are stuff that we knew about from the first movie. Like Tall Man is crushing down people. This is mostly in the third act, being like when the portal is revealed, Reg is looking in those barrels to see the dwarves, and they say, hey, he's crushing people down into dwarves into these barrels. And then when they go through the portal, we see the same red planet with the same giant line of dwarves and the giant line of barrels. And also, when the Tall Man makes his appearance, it's exactly the same as in the first movie. It's a jump scare of him grabbing somebody's shoulder. The only difference is in the first movie, it's to Jody saying, "Funeral is about to begin, sir." And then in the second movie, he grabs Liz's shoulder. He pretty much says the same thing, saying, "Graveside service is about to begin." He's pretty much saying the same thing. Funeral is about to begin. This isn't quite as bad as a lot of other examples of sequelitis in franchises, but to me, it sticks out a little bit more than others, because they try to write off all of these different twists as things that we've never seen before. Now, I don't know if that was Don Coscarelli reintroducing these ideas because it'd been 9 years since the first movie, but to me, that just kind of comes off as lazy writing a little bit, because it also shows you don't have enough faith into your public and of your fans of your first film to not know all this shit from beforehand. So that definitely sticks out to me in a negative way. Con number 4 is all the studio meddling. Phantasm 2 is very much so a streamlined version of Phantasm. This goes into my next con number. Hang on. 5 is the story is very simple. There's no twists and turns. There's no mindfuck reveals. There's no ambiguity or dream sequences. That's all what made Phantasm feel unique. And this is something that I do think that Phantasm 3 rectifies very much so. But this movie feels very streamlined and very simple, and that's because of studio interference. They wanted this movie to be as simple as possible, to be as mainstream as possible. And while it works in some areas, in what made Phantasm feel unique, being all the mind fucking twists. That's what made Phantasm feel like Phantasm. And when you take that away, this movie just feels like a generic road revenge sci-fi action movie. That isn't necessarily bad, but it's not Phantasm, if that makes any sense at all. Again, I need to really stop saying that. But this doesn't quite feel like Phantasm. Obviously, it still does feel like Phantasm because it's called Phantasm. It features characters from the first movie, and it has the Tall Man. But this feels like Diet Phantasm. And also, a lot of the studio meddling, it just feels like it's a slap in the face. Like, all of the narration in this movie was added because the studio felt that the audience wouldn't figure out what was going on screen through all the visual storytelling. And also, like, Liz actually was a mandated decision by the studio because they wanted a female love interest. They wanted no dream sequences and no ambiguity. That's kind of what made the first movie unique. It doesn't work in the first movie because it's an incomplete film, but that is what makes Phantasm 3 work. And also, one more thing I want to say about the sequelitis too. The movie ends exactly the same way as the first movie does as well. People being pulled through a window by hands breaking through the glass by a surprise reappearance of the Tall Man. But all the studio meddling, it just makes me feel like really like I feel disrespected almost when I watch parts of this movie because the studio interference is just so mean-spirited and it feels like a spit in the eye. And like I said, they made Phantasm feel like Diet Phantasm, which I definitely do think is a problem. I'm sure Don Coscarelli took that as a spit in the eye as well. Which is why I will always say Phantasm 3 is a much better film than Phantasm 2. I will, of course, elaborate on that when I talk about Phantasm 3. But for me, it's just very difficult not to talk about Phantasm 3 and 2 and not compare them at all. So, moving on. Con number 7 is the third act does feel a little rushed. And this also goes into the next problem that I have is... actually, no. So I have 11 cons as well. I also think this movie is a little too short. Specifically, I strongly theorize that there was some footage edited out of the third act because the third act feels so rushed. I feel like there's some stuff missing. And this also goes into the next problem that I have is this movie is very tame. I theorize that's because the MPAA decided to step in as well and put their fingerprints all over this movie as well. When Father Myers is killed off, his death is very underwhelming. There's very little blood. The editing is very choppy and quick and piss poor, in my opinion. And when his entire brain is drilled out, he falls to the ground, and in front of him, you see this giant pool of blood. But that doesn't make sense because they showcase in his death that there's just like a little of blood coming out of his head. And it's very tame and it's very piss poor, in my opinion. So yeah, this movie's too tame. It's too short. The studio interference is really, really mean-spirited. And it just gets in the way of this movie reaching its full potential. So...
Hey, wasn't this the longest movie?
Yes, it is. This is the longest Phantasm film at 97 minutes long. And I feel like this movie would have benefited even if it was just 15 minutes longer. But so, con number 10, I lost track of there, but yeah, we're up to con number 10. Father Myers. Whoa. at least the actress who plays Liz does an okay job. Like, it's not Oscar worthy or anything, but she does decent. It's just her character is garbage, but the actress does a decent job playing the character. But yo, the guy who plays Father Myers is terrible. So much of his dialogue is just bad and forced, and his facial expressions and the way he acts is so hammy. Like, after he stabs Liz's grandfather's corpse, apples and oranges,
Zoom
Justin.
in.
What?
The zoom in, that shot.
Yeah, so the zoom in on Father Carmine's, or Father Carmine, yeah, that's Rocky. On Father Myers' face, it's just like, it's like this. And I'm just like, why? That is so fucking painfully funny. It just ruins the scene because it's so funny. It just looks like a surprised look on someone's face after they hear somebody cut a hellacious fart. And how he pours his liquor and he drinks it down from the shot glass. It's so bad and it's so hammy. He's like, oh, whoa, man, that's some good whiskey. And probably the only time where his acting is somewhat appropriately hammy is when he gets his ear cut off. He lets out this long scream. Father Myers is just bad. He sticks out like a sore thumb, and whenever he's on screen, I'm just like, God, please kill him. Please kill him. But we don't even get a good death because I do feel like his brain drilling scene was cut down by the MPAA.
They were on a rampage in the 80s.
Yes. Justin Tang asked me, Nick, what is worse to you, an unintentionally unfunny comedy or an unintentionally funny horror movie? An unintentionally unfunny comedy, because there's not much worse than a bad comedy. One of my wife's favorite comedies is Superbad. I didn't laugh a single time watching that movie. But at least with an unintentionally funny horror movie, being unintentionally funny doesn't necessarily mean that's bad. Look at Day of the Dead. All the villains in that film are funnier than shit. And they're fun to watch.
It's still entertaining, which is really why we're watching the movie to start with.
Exactly. And the last problem that I have with this movie, con number 11, is James LeGros. Or LeGros. How the fuck you... Or James LeGros. How the hell do you say his name?
I think it's Grow. I'm not sure.
All right, let's go with James LeGros. Acting-wise, he's not terrible. Like, he conveys the spirit of 79, a Michael Baldwin. The only reason I have a major issue with James LeGros is because he sticks out like a sore thumb because A. Michael Baldwin plays Mike throughout the rest of the franchise. And whenever I watch Phantasm 2, it just doesn't quite work for me because I know that A. Michael Baldwin was supposed to be here, but Universal were a bunch of dickheads. And also the decision to cast him purely because he was the pretty boy at the time, I just kind of feel like that's pointless, and they hired a pretty face, not a good actor. So I just feel like that's a little stupid. But not much to say other than that. Then James LeGros, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and he's one of the elements that makes Phantasm 2 slightly a little hard to watch when I'm going on a Phantasm marathon. But with all that being said, let's wrap up our final thoughts on Phantasm 2. Go ahead, Trev.
Well, on the note of that last con, I think maybe in the horror genre, a comparison that fans might make is the jump from Patricia Arquette to Tuesday Night in the Third and Fourth Nightmare.
That one isn't quite as bad because Tuesday Night is killed off a third into the film.
Well, and actually, I also prefer her to Patricia Arquette, believe it or not, but that's probably a controversial opinion.
Yeah. But we ain't reviewing Nightmare on Elm Street, so continue.
So, yeah, actually, when you were going through your cons, I think it was either 5 or 6, you really had me thinking, could I be considered an actual Phantasm fan if this is my favorite, considering how much it mainstreams the concept?
I don't know. Can you?
Well, I mean, I was just thinking about that. I still like either most of the movies or parts of some of the later ones, but it just occurred to me that maybe I like my stuff to be a lot more straightforward. Like we've brought up Hellraiser a lot in this review. My favorite one of those is 3, believe it or not. And it's probably because it's basically ripping off A Nightmare on Elm Street or that franchise, but I'm also a fan of that series. So again, it makes me think that, can somebody really be considered well, I don't want to go there because whenever you start talking about legitimate fans or not, nobody really should have to decide that for you.
I 100% agree with that. That's why I'm not really saying anything.
No, that's why I came to that conclusion. It's just something whenever you were bringing up that con that made me think, maybe I'm turned off by the weirdness, but at the same time, like you said, that is what is the unique appeal of the franchise.
So overall, your final thoughts on Phantasm 2?
Oh, before I get into that, one real quick little thing. I like little Fangoria advertisement. I believe it's on the Anchor Bay DVD for the first movie, oddly enough. It was supposed to coincide with this movie, and it's a real nice little spot where Angus Scrimm, as the tall man, basically does an advertisement for the magazine. I really like the way he says TV.
Are we feeding out? Are you dying? Your
That'll do it. I'm not dying.
Your grandparents just told me that all you make today is a corn dog.
Oh.
I'm gonna feed you now.
Okay.
Wife just got home, so I got to wrap up pretty soon. Sorry. Something about Fangoria. Sorry about that. My wife just scared the shit out of both of us.
No, I was just saying that around the time this came out, Angus Scrimm did a little video advertisement for Fangoria magazine, and it was a nice little tidbit. I'm surprised it wasn't included as the extras for this movie, but I really like that. So my final thoughts: this is my favorite movie in the franchise as of these recent rewatches, and my rating would probably be a 9 out of 10 because I think there is that one element that brings it down, in my opinion. But yeah, it's up there. I think I'm going to try and watch this at least once or twice a year around Halloween time from now on.
Fair enough. So my final thoughts on Phantasm 2, it's kind of a mixed bag, obviously. In many ways, Phantasm 2 is a drastic improvement over the first Phantasm film. It's got better effects, better acting. It's more mainstream. It's more streamlined. It's got a bigger budget. But at that same time, there's a lot of elements that hold it back from me calling it a true classic. The studio meddling hurts. Liz doesn't work. James LeGros sticks out like a sore thumb. The lack of tall man. It just feels... It feels like Diet Phantasm. And this isn't my favorite in the series, but I do like this film for what it is. I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. It's a decent movie. You can't say that the filmmakers didn't try to make this entertaining. And if you want to watch just an entertaining 80s horror movie, this movie's right up your alley. So I do recommend it in that way. I just think that if you're a diehard Phantasm fan and you like the more trippy, weird stuff, like if you like Phantasm 3 and you haven't seen Phantasm 2, go into this guarded. So you might be a little disappointed.
You have to answer, do you want a chicken sandwich? Breakfast sandwich?
So overall, yeah, 7 out of 10. It's a decent movie, but there's a lot of things that I don't like about it. So anything to plug, Trev?
Yeah, so week 3 of Kongtober is my time to shine, so to speak. An article about the unmade Legend of King Kong went up on Monday. Tomorrow will be my personal thoughts on the 76 remake of King Kong. And then at the end of the week, I'm going to be doing a feature on King Kong Lives.
Oh, boy.
Oh, and I would also like to mention two horror YouTubers, since you've mentioned a couple several times through our reviews. I would like to plug or mention the Lucid Nightmare and Christian Hannah Moore.
I haven't heard of either of those two. I'll have to look them up.
I really like those guys.
Alrighty.
I really like those guys.
Alrighty, so post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. Join us tomorrow when we talk about, I'm just going to say it, my personal favorite of the Phantasm franchise, when we talk about 1994's Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead. Join us tomorrow for that review. And as always, go out and, if you want to live, stop hanging around mortuaries with giant, tall, creepy-looking men. And I'll see you guys in the next review.